The possible third overall pick for the New York Giants and more coming up.
Touchdown!
Welcome back to the All Blue New York Giants podcast. I'm your host, Aiden Nolan, and we're going to jump right into it today. And I'll tell you right away, today, my episode, I was looking to do a first-round mock draft with, and kind of just go over the three possible picks at number 3 the Giants would have, and I was set on just kind of comparing them three, going through it, and then having my pick on who I wanted at the end. But I started off with one of these guys, and I started going through his strengths and weaknesses and realized that I could probably talk about him for an entire episode. So that's exactly what we are going to do, and it's someone who's very controversial. This is a player that a lot of people have a lot of opinions on. I'm sure his draft stock went up and down for the last couple of months. So I just want to hop right into it real quick and not give away that player. If you clicked on the video, you obviously know what player I'm talking about. But I want to talk about our Big Blue dilemma really quickly. And that dilemma is that we have 3 players, in my opinion. This is one of the first drafts where I'm so uncertain on what we are going to be doing in the first round. There is 3 players that I think all have very good chances of being drafted by the Giants at number 3, and it obviously depends on what happens in the first 2 picks, because these 3 players are not all going to be there. It's most likely going to be 2 of these players. We're not entirely sure what one of those 2 players could be. So, first off, we're going to name these players. It's Abdul Carter from Penn State, the edge. It's Shedeur Sanders, the Colorado quarterback, and it's Travis Hunter, the Colorado wide receiver / cornerback / Swiss Army knife. Those are the 3 guys that I think have very good chances to be drafted by the Giants. Now, once again, we've been hearing a lot of smoke that the Browns have shifted their attention to Travis Hunter, and now they're very bought into him. So if Travis Hunter gets drafted to the Browns, I think Abdul Carter can very well go to the Giants, as well as, of course, Shedeur Sanders. And obviously, if it's flipped, Abdul Carter goes to the Browns, I think Travis Hunter very well could have just the same amount of possibilities as Shedeur Sanders. So, on my Instagram, I have a kind of like a short form analysis draft breakdown on these 3 players. I released these 3. That's why I wanted to kind of do this episode. But hopefully next Sunday, I will be able to talk about Abdul Carter and Travis Hunter, because I was going through Shedeur Sanders, getting all of my material ready, listening to all these different type of opinions, going through the stats and analytics, and realize that this is definitely a possible talking point. Because for me personally, I have some mixed opinions on Shedeur Sanders. Obviously, the Giants need a quarterback. We don't desperately need a quarterback to where we have to force it. So it is a luxury to be able to step back and really evaluate and determine if this guy is right for the Giants. So Shedeur Sanders, we'll go through some of his metrics. 6'2", I believe he's 23 years old, from Colorado, weighs 212 pounds. Per NFL Draft Buzz, which is kind of what the website I go off of, has him ranked as the second best quarterback behind Shedeur Sanders, ranked at 89% out of 100. That's just their player rating. And they go through his measurables and stuff like that. His 40-yard dash obviously was not completed here. This was completed at something else. It wasn't his pro day. It wasn't the combine. So it's a 4.68, which isn't awful, but we'll get into it later on, kind of talk about how he stands up about, maneuvering the pocket, getting outside the pocket, and even taking off. And we'll talk about that speed and stuff like that. But let's just dive right into it. I don't have an exact angle here. Let me get down to my material here. And we're just going to start off with the positives. The positives of Shedeur Sanders and what his strengths can be, and what you may see watching his tape and watching him play quarterback. And one of those top things is his throwing mechanics. Accuracy and arm talent, his toughness and leadership, and his production with no run game and a bad O-line at Colorado. That was kind of the first 4 things that really stuck out that you can say and determine just from watching him that he has. Now, a lot of people thought a lot of people thought that experts and people who really broke him down really said that he had a bad arm. I don't think he necessarily has a bad arm. It's just when you're comparing him with the top of the top NFL talent and you're looking at some of these guys' arm talent, yes, he doesn't have the greatest arm talent ever, but that doesn't always mean success. I do think his arm talent is NFL caliber. He can succeed with his arm talent. You know, he has insane accuracy, I will say. He's a pocket passer type quarterback. We take a look at Cam Ward. Cam Ward can run a little bit more. Obviously, he still has some finesse in the pocket, but Shedeur Sanders is one of those quarterbacks where he's those traditional, sit in the pocket, he'll maneuver his way, but he will necessarily always keep his eyes downfield, and I do think that that can be a strength in some points where nowadays we see some of these quarterbacks where the pocket breaks down and they immediately want to take off and not really, try and get people open. We saw that a couple times with DJ where the protection would break down. He'd get off his first or second read and he'd immediately try and roll out and run. So seeing that traditional quarterback, but also seeing that he has that accuracy, and we'll get into his stats, don't worry. This is just straight off some bullet points and kind of talking right through it. His throwing mechanics are pretty crisp. He could throw off of some weird angles and some weird foot angles, but he'd still get the job done, and obviously his toughness and leadership. Great toughness, leadership. His pro day was a couple of days ago. He mentioned having some of his teammates there because he knew that if he would be throwing, a lot of scouts would be there, so a lot of his teammates would also be getting looks, and that just shows a lot about his leadership, obviously. And, a lot of people are going to talk about him throwing his teammates under the bus, and kind of doing some of that stuff and being cocky and, being very full of himself in some sort of way. And Dan Orlovsky, I don't really like Dan Orlovsky that much, but he said it very well. And he talked about Baker Mayfield and how Baker Mayfield is very cocky, loves to talk about himself and, stuff like that. And we still value Baker Mayfield as a solid quarterback. So what makes it any difference for Shedeur Sanders? And obviously, Shedeur Sanders has a lot of hype around his name because of his last name, obviously. Deion Sanders is his father. He coached him at Jackson State and Colorado. So it kind of makes it a little bit of is he going to perform like this, when his dad isn't coaching him? Is he going to perform like this because his name isn't Sanders? You know what I mean? If his name wasn't Sanders, would he still be getting this hype? I'm not sure. Obviously, I can't go into a portal and change the whole scenario right now. So we're just working with what we got. And the truth of the matter is, Colorado had a bad O-line. They also didn't have an insane run game. So some of the numbers that he put up at Colorado, I will say, are very impressive, but he also had some things that were glaring and some issues that may not translate to the NFL and may honestly hurt him in the NFL. So let's jump right into it and talk about some of his numbers under pressure and without pressure. When the pocket's kept clean, with pressure. That's the two categories. So we're going to start off with under pressure. Last year, he had 12 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, which was pretty solid production under pressure, obviously. And then we're going to go into some advanced metrics right here. We have big time throw percentage. So big time throw percentage measures how often a quarterback makes a high difficulty, high impact throw with, think about tight windows, deep shots, sideline shots, or just perfectly placed throws under pressure here. And his big time throw percentage was 4.9%. And going through that really quickly, because I wanted to kind of compare some of the other quarterbacks just to give you guys a sense of what this means. So his big time throw percentage was 4.9%. Now, taking a look at some of the quarterbacks in 2024, Caleb Williams had 7.5%, which is, an elite deep passer right there. Dak Prescott had 3%, very conservative there. And then some guys who were a little similar to him, Pat Mahomes, 4.7%, evenly distributed, and Jaden Daniels was at 5.3%, big time throw percentage. So with a struggling O-line, that isn't bad. It's not horrible. And a lot of people will take a look at him and say, after you hear some of the critics, and the critics talk about how his arm isn't, elite. I don't think his arm is elite. I think his arm is solid, and he can throw those deep balls, obviously. I just think that there's some other aspects that make it hard for you to really look at Shedeur Sanders and say, yeah, this guy's a slam dunk pick, great, elite. He's, he should go number 1 overall. But that's his big time throw percentage. Now we're going to go over his turnover worthy play percentage. So what turnover play worthy percentage really dives into is it talks about how many plays that he makes that are turnover worthy. If they're in the hands of a DB or a badly placed ball. It was 2.5% for him under pressure. Once again, all these stats that I'm reading off right now are under pressure. So the stats that I read for the big-time throw percentage, I was comparing quarterbacks that weren't under pressure. That was normal. So that's just him, with the stakes risen a little bit. So right now we'll come on back to turnover-worthy play percentage. It was 2.5%. Was a little risky, but he wasn't completely reckless. And to put this into perspective for you, his overall turnover-worthy play percentage, tongue twister here, is 1.1%. That was with all of his throws, and that was in the 2024 season, and that was one of the lowest in the FBS, despite playing behind a pretty subpar O-line there. And once again, to put this into perspective, Jayden Daniels of the Washington Commanders last year had a 1.5 percentage on that among all quarterbacks. And then looking at the complete other side of the scale, Jalen Hurts, 4.1 percentage on turnover-worthy play. Not entirely great. We know Jayden Daniels and Jalen Hurts as quarterbacks. So that's just to put it into perspective and to show you that, no, he doesn't really turn over the football, even when he's not under pressure. And especially looking at these numbers under pressure, it's almost like looking at it with a magnifying glass, as we know that a lot of quarterbacks may get frazzled under pressure and throw something absolutely insane. So once again, we'll move into his last bullet point here. Under pressure, his adjusted completion percentage is 68.7%, which is not horrible. It's pretty impressive knowing that he's hurried under pressure. And what adjusted completion percentage really measures is it takes out like spikes, takes out thrown away balls, takes away some of those things that it's hard to really measure. So it's really hard to get those numbers from all the quarterbacks because it's really hard to kind of get those numbers in general. So that's his under pressure. That's kind of his stats under pressure. Honestly, not horrible. Like we went over, I think he's a solid quarterback. Now, I will get into my analysis later on, but a sneak peek for that is I think he is a solid pocket passing quarterback, and I don't think that he's going to make those risky throws. I think he will make those throws when needed, but when times get tough, or when, he's down, he's not going to really put the ball in harm's way that often, and he's a very accurate passer. Obviously, we haven't seen him in the NFL, and we'll go over some of his negatives, which honestly are a very lengthy list of negatives for me. Are kind of, for my prospects, I want to be able to rip them apart more than kind of give them their flowers, because anyone can go on and turn a camera on and talk about how great a player is. No one wants to really do that dirty work. I mean, I guess it could be vice versa. But regardless, I do think the negatives is what makes up a player, not entirely, but really shows you what to work with and shows you how raw their talent may or may not be. So moving on into their kept clean percentage, or his kept clean statistics, he had a 25-5 touchdown to interception ratio, which is very efficient right there. Obviously, kept clean. His big time throw percentage, 5.1%, obviously under pressure is 4.9%. So that's still relatively very similar to Jayden Daniels was last year. Obviously, this is college, is not the NFL. And then we're going to take a look at turnover-worthy play percentage. This 0.5%. Extremely, I mentioned this, under pressure, it was, what was it under pressure? 2.5%. 0.5% when the pocket is completely kept clean. Once again, I said he's not going to really turn over the football. Obviously, just because you don't turn over the football doesn't make you an amazing quarterback, but it's definitely a perk, I think. And then lastly, we'll go over the adjusted completion percentage. Obviously, we saw it was 67%? 68.7%. Here, with a clean pocket, 86.3%. That is pretty elite with a clean pocket. And obviously that didn't happen often because Colorado didn't have an insane O-line. So, like I said before, adjusted completion percentage accounts for throwaways, spikes, passes hit as thrown. So that's kind of his under pressure and clean pocket statistics there. And once again, it solidifies some of his strengths here. And we're going to go over it to kind of round it out. Those were kind of the stats and kind of the typical list bullet points. I'm going to go over some of his strengths as of right now to kind of round that all up. You know, obviously, he has very good, almost surgical-like accuracy. Obviously, it's FBS. Obviously, it's still college. So some stuff may not translate immediately, but you got to take a look at it for what it's worth. When you're taking a look at a whole plate, you got to make sure you include everything, all the toppings, all the sides, of course, the main course. But he has a very nice release. Some people call it a lightning quick release. I like his release, very nice. Like I talked about it at the beginning of this show on kind of the stuff that he is very good for. Now, his processing and diagnosis is something that I should, you mark with an asterisk over it because I will get into that later. Some of his processing speed is not, NFL caliber, in my opinion. I do think he's solid. He's able to kind of diagnose and read a defense. But once it gets a little muddy, I think he struggles. And also when he doesn't completely trust himself and commit, which is honestly one of the reasons why he has such a low turnover percentage and, puts the ball in harm very little, is because sometimes he doubts himself or he kind of hitches, taps the ball back, reconsiders, and doesn't pull the trigger when he really should, and he misses out on some opportunities like that. However, like we said, great poise under duress, able to manipulate the pocket under pressure, find out, keep his eyes down the field, square up, and deliver a very nice ball. Obviously, command of the huddle, we talked about his leadership, and his mobility is okay. It's not insane. It's not, you're taking a look at it and you're like, wow, this guy can really move outside the pocket. He's Lamar Jackson. He can run. Shedeur Sanders runs when he has to, but he's always looking to keep the ball downfield. Obviously, he makes some of these college guys miss, but I think his speed is very good for college. I don't know how that will play out in the NFL when you have these guys who are chasing after you. He may not be the quickest, so that's why you have to kind of take it with an asterisk and look at the conversion rate. So now, my favorite part, not to completely tear up, Shedeur Sanders. This could be a future New York Giant we're looking for in a couple of weeks. But once again, I'm going to list off his negatives. We have a couple stats listed in there. We're going to go over some stats. We're going to compare him to Daniel Jones because, we love to do that, and kind of round it out with a quote from Kurt Benkert. So we'll do all of that and more after this. Welcome back to the show. Appreciate you guys for sticking around. And once again, like I said, we are going to go through some of the negatives here for quarterback Shedeur Sanders. Hope you guys enjoyed the first part of the video. I haven't really done something like this. Thought it'd be really cool to switch it up instead of giving you a first-round mock draft, which I may do that next week. But I still want to go over Abdul Carter, and Travis Hunter. But Shedeur Sanders, I felt like I could make a complete video out of him. So I wanted to just do one just to kind of go over some things. So kicking it off, of course, not incredible speed. I mentioned this earlier. If you take a look at his tape, his speed isn't insane. On NFL Draft Buzz, it claims that he has ran a 4.6 40. Take that with a grain of salt. If you take a look at his running capabilities, he may not, I haven't really seen him, really tuck the ball and try and really run it. I've seen him kind of be a little bit more nonchalant like Cam Ward, but even when he is relatively running, he still can get tripped up, and that is what causes those sacks, is when he's rolling outside the pocket or tries to get away. He gets tripped up and caught by those D linemen. So that's just a testament on his speed. Once again, I mentioned this before the break. He's still developing the ability to diagnose complex defensive looks. If you want to take a look at that, on an amazing scale. Take a look at the BYU game, the Alamo Bowl. That shows it. You give him complex looks. Obviously, you're going to the NFL. Guess what? You're going to get complex looks. And something that I guess I'll touch on a little later, but once again, is when you can't really, dive into those complex looks, then you get a little frazzled, then you can't read that defense, then that leads to not great balls, that leads to either turnovers, not great balls, incompletions, or even sacks. So that's not always great, and you see that on full display just from different defensive fronts when they muddy up the front eight. He's not, too well, and I feel like we've been a little spoiled. Not even spoiled. I feel like we've seen this on full display. I think DJ was honestly very similar. You get 8 down linemen right there. Obviously, this is a testament to the Giants' O-line on how it was, because you see 8 down linemen, you're like, this guy's either going to die or we're getting the ball out real quick. Once again, he can be overconfident with arm talent. Once again, I mentioned this earlier on sometimes how he needed to throw the ball, get it out a little quicker. And when looking at things, his processing speed may not be that NFL caliber, and I think hopefully I'll tear him up on this a little later, because this is something that's so frustrating to watch. But with tight windows close in college way slower than they close in the NFL. Which is, once again, you know what? Let's just do it. Let's just throw it all out there right now. Which is why, once again, you need to throw it as soon as you see a tell. Shout out Bobby Skinner, Giants Nation podcast. Make sure to follow him if you haven't already. Started it brand new. He had his Shedeur Sanders draft film breakdown a couple weeks ago. I want to say 3-4 weeks ago. And something that he went over and emphasized is just his lack of ability to just fire it in when he reads, when he has a guy streaking down and it's too high and he's going up the seam wide open. Fire it in there. No, he waits, throws it late, and then, this was present in the Alamo Bowl. Threw it late. Ball got tipped up by his receiver, which should have been caught, yes. He forces the receiver to slow down, also because he threw the ball out late. But once again, what I'm trying to get at here is his arm talent, like I said, is solid. But when you have that kind of late processing or late to pull the trigger, you need to have, if you have that strong arm talent, not even just arm talent to be able to throw it deep, but that arm talent to put velocity on that football, to fire it in there, or send a bullet, a fastball to get it to your receiver who's streaking right open. If you're making your reads on the right side, you're looking, and you see him on the left side, and you either get there late, you better be able to pull the trigger right then and there. But sometimes we saw Shedeur Sanders take a look at his guy streaking open, and he kind of hesitates because he doesn't know what's going to happen, or he doesn't want to get baited. And that's where that, he doesn't turn over the football, yes, but also that may lead to him second-guessing himself, not firing it in there right away, throwing a ball late, and it ends up going incomplete, or even worse, getting picked off because he doesn't trust himself. And obviously, it almost looks like that he needs to triple check to see if that window is still available for him to throw it in there. We just mentioned this. In the NFL, the windows close like this, maybe even quicker. So the fact that you need to double check, obviously I'm not telling you to, you see a patch of grass, fire it in there, but obviously speed up that processing speed just a little bit to be able to fire it in there. He has arm talent, yes. He could throw it deep, yes. But you still need to be able to throw with anticipation and reading what window's open for how, the amount of time. And that's something that I think is such a big negative with Shedeur Sanders that he needs to work at. I still think he's a solid prospect, but that's something where I think that's why a lot of NFL teams are maybe shying away from him and kind of looking at him like the processing speed is such a big thing, because once again, I mentioned before, if you don't have that high level processing speed, you better be able to put some zip on the football and fire it in there. Shedeur Sanders doesn't have that. He has arm talent, but his ball, he ain't firing in there. You know what I mean? So I think that's just a key negative. And speaking of negative, we'll move into our next point, is he takes a lot of negative plays instead of throwing the ball away. He took 52 sacks in 2024, sorry. I don't know why I'm thinking 2022. He took 54 sacks. And obviously, Colorado's O-line is not amazing. And we know Shedeur Sanders as a quarterback, his tendency is to either make some room, move throughout the pocket, plant and fire it in there, not really look to run. I do think, occasionally he has ran, and I do think that putting that more on his plate where he'll be able to kind of take off instead may benefit him a little more, but him running around in the pocket, obviously, and we know his speed isn't insane, which is once again why I mentioned it. If you take a look at some of his sacks, it's just him trying to get away, he gets tripped up, or it's him kind of not realizing where the pressure is. And it's also this, which is my next point, is he has a tendency to drift backwards. Obviously, we've all played Madden, and some things that a lot of these creators tell you, oh, if you're not good at Madden, here's some things you can improve. When you snap the football, you just don't hold your left stick back and you continue to drift. You continue to drift, those edges are able to break right off. Obviously, it's a video game, but you want to be able to step up in the pocket and kind of stand in there and fire, or find the open space, the breathing room to just be able to fire in a football. If you're drifting backwards, once again, that literally ties hand in hand in why you're taking sacks, is that reason right there. Drifting backwards is not always going to be great. Also, it may throw off your timing. If you throw out the ball late, you're just throwing it off your back foot. You might not come across correctly. So once again, he just takes sacks, and we've lived with Daniel Jones. That boy takes some sacks too. Obviously, our O-line wasn't great. Once again, I will say, this is me. I'm a biased Giants fan. I don't think our O-line will be that bad. It wasn't bad last year, and Andrew Thomas wasn't even there. Towards the end of the year, it was solid. It was pretty solid. So if we do draft Shedeur Sanders, I think hopefully he should be able to work at that. But obviously taking sacks is a very big component. It's a very big drive killer. We've seen it throughout Daniel Jones's years. When we take a sack, the drive's pretty much over. It's pretty much over. So moving up, once again, I mentioned this before. This is where I was going to actually talk about this, but his recognition response time, especially against blitzes, is not good. Especially against top-tier competition. Take a look at any of his games against better opponents. You're going to see this come up. You're going to see blitz packages. You're going to see different alignments, different coverages, and it's going to shift post-snap. And Shedeur Sanders, obviously, like I said, has to triple check where the window is, if it's a real window. Has to be able to, trust himself, doesn't fire it in there, doesn't have velocity on the football. That's a recipe for disaster when you don't know that this blitz is coming and you have no idea what to do with the football. And once again, that just ties right into sacks, which I think is another huge component, a huge negative. One other thing I want to look at, a very big stat, which I will go in and compare with Daniel Jones, is he ranked minus 1.8 average air yards to the first down marker. So what does that mean? That is the tendency to target receivers closer to the line of scrimmage rather than deeper downfield. So that's his tendency on where the first down marker is, where he fires it, where he kind of throws. And he has a shorter tendency. He ranked 132nd among 147 quarterbacks per True Media. That is abysmal. He needs to be more aggressive. Obviously, depends on the solution, but also depends on pressure. And as Giants fans, this stat perfectly correlates on what our quarterback play has been. You want me to tell you why? Let me tell you why. Daniel Jones. I couldn't find his average air yards to the first down marker, but these two stats correlate very well. Daniel Jones in 2022, that was the year we made the playoffs. Daniel Jones had an average depth of target of 6.42 yards, which was one of the shortest of the league. What that means is Daniel Jones is throwing the ball, that's his average depth of target, 6 yards. We're not going above the sticks. We're going 6 yards. Obviously, this stat isn't exactly what we're saying about Shedeur Sanders here, but Shedeur Sanders is minus 1.8 average air yards to the first down marker. Once again, passes beyond the first down marker in 2022 for Daniel Jones, only 37% of his balls were beyond the first down marker. That was 44th out of 47 quarterbacks. Horrible. Horrible. Throw past the sticks. According to CBS, Shedeur Sanders, I have 3 different sites here, so they're all going to be a little different here. and they have different qualifications. But Shedeur Sanders' average depth of target was 8.1, which ranked 129th out of 156 in 2024. Obviously, you can't compare college to the NFL, but when you're still pretty bottom of the league in college, this is college. No, we're not to guys, but there's some guys, especially on defense, we have higher scoring games, obviously. The defense isn't as stacked. And when you have only an 8.1 yards, which is literally 2 yards more than DJ, I don't like that. That's not a stat I like. Once again, Sports Illustrated, aDOT of 8.5 yards. That's their ranking. And once again, Mike Frazier and aDOT of 8.8 with at least 100 dropbacks. That's not good at all, dude. Obviously, once again, we said he's conservative with the football. That's a plus. He doesn't turn the ball over. But there's some components into that. He's kind of reluctant to throw sometimes. He puts himself in those situations to take those sacks instead of throwing it away or, really kind of getting the ball out quick. And, of course, he doesn't throw the ball that far down the field. Now, not saying that he can't. We saw with DJ is DJ got really – his deep ball was horrible after a couple of his neck injuries. I didn't think it was that bad to the beginning of his career, but it got worse as it went. So we're kind of very, used to that kind of like short to intermediate. Sanders can do that. I think he's very accurate in his short to intermediate. That's where his accuracy is amazing, and I think he has a very solid deep ball. Like I said, I'm not going to reiterate the things I said before, but, reluctant to throw. He doesn't have that insane velocity on the football to really fire it in there, so if he looks off late, the ball may not get there in time. The ball may flutter for a little bit, And I'll end off this video here with this quote, and then I'll kind of talk about my personal opinion on Shedeur Sanders as a whole, because I feel like my opinion has shifted the last couple of months so many different ways. But Ben Kurt, obviously the former backup quarterback, I love to watch his draft breakdowns or his film breakdowns. Please check him out if you haven't. As a former NFL quarterback, he has some great insights to kind of how these quarterbacks read and how they may pull the trigger. So really go check him out for his Shedeur Sanders breakdown. Love that. Also, Bobby Skinner's, once again, is very good. But here is his quote. Quote, "The biggest thing that stood out to me was his pocket presence and ability to navigate and recreate the pocket from different depths through subtle movements. He's not the guy that's looking to run away from pressure. He likes to sidestep it and stay in the pocket to give his guys more time to get open." End quote. Obviously, we talked about it. He's not a guy looking to run away from pressure. He's looking to evade the pressure, but stay in the pocket. And sometimes that may lead to sacks. It may lead to sacks because he's not fast enough. It may lead to sacks because he may need to run away. But he can create out of the pocket, and that's something where that's a big trait of Mahomes. He can create, not necessarily always inside the pocket, but he can create. And I think that's huge for a quarterback. So that's kind of Shedeur Sanders right there. My personal opinion, I started out last year with, Shedeur Sanders. Obviously, I didn't watch him. I just heard Sanders. I watched a little bit of him. Heard the last name Sanders. I said, hell yeah, give me Shedeur Sanders. Then I kind of stepped away from him because I heard a lot of the hate that came out. Obviously, there's going to be hate because he's Shedeur Sanders' kid. I mean, he's not Shedeur. He's Deion Sanders' kid. So, the media, of course, will naturally either raise him up higher, but also there's people who will completely knock him down just for that hype. And I do think that you need to find a middle ground of, if his last name was not Sanders, how would you evaluate this quarterback? I think he's a solid prospect. If the Giants went up there and drafted, and Travis Hunter got taken, Abdul Carter's on the board, and they take Shedeur Sanders, will I be a little upset? Yes. Will I understand, though obviously coming from Joe Shane's situation, he still hasn't drafted a quarterback yet. Will I understand? Obviously, this quarterback room, I think it got better. Did it get that much better? No. Do I think we can still draft a quarterback? Yes. And I think Shedeur Sanders, if we were to draft him, I wouldn't think that's the worst thing because, in my opinion, I think Russ would probably start the whole year we paid him to. If he stinks it up, get him out there. But the truth of the matter is that we're not going to be throwing Shedeur Sanders out there right away, which I think, in my opinion, is better than throwing out the rookie from week 1. Get him to learn a little bit, sit back. Obviously, the clock's ticking, but that's what I think is better, and we've seen a lot of quarterbacks really succeed and improve with that. So once again, if I heard Shedeur Sanders' name and Abdul Carter's on the board, or even Travis Hunter, I would obviously want those guys more, because those guys have a way more bigger impact on this team this year, especially, and in the future, than I do think Shedeur Sanders. I think Abdul Carter and Travis Hunter are generational guys that can really lift up a franchise, especially Abdul Carter. You know, I don't care we have Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau. This guy can wreak havoc, and we've seen look at Philly. This is my response every time. Philly built up their D-line. It don't matter. It doesn't matter. They got everyone from Georgia. They built their O-line up, or their D-line up, and it just creates havoc. That's something we haven't really seen. Dexter Lawrence comes off the field, they gash us for 10 yards or a carry. You know, Brian Burns and Kayvon don't get there. Quarterback has years to throw. You know, so hurrying up that process will be amazing. Same thing with Travis Hunter. Wide receiver, corner, don't matter. Insane ball hawk abilities, which is, I'm giving you a preview for next week. But my thing with Shedeur Sanders is he has some very solid traits. Some traits that we haven't really seen in the past couple of years. But we also have some traits that we have seen in the past couple of years that may be harder to fix, that may be something that may stick with him the rest of his career. And once again, it's not that flashy quarterback that a lot of guys love to see. That flashy quarterback to throw it 70 yards, you know? And Kurt Benkirk said it very well, and I'll leave you guys with this, is, you know, if he was able to get into a situation with a very good offensive-minded head coach where he plays point guard and he's more of a facilitator and only needs to make crazy plays when he absolutely has to, where he doesn't need to go out every single drive and need to put together, insane masterclass, he may very well succeed. And I'm not entirely sure if that's the Giants. Obviously, Dable's a very offensive-minded head coach, very solid quarterback coach. I mean, it's really only been Josh Allen, but I think that he may be able to be a solid quarterback. I think he may be able to be a solid quarterback in the NFL. A lot of people have compared him to like a Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins can be solid. He won't be insane. He won't be elite top 5, but he's a solid quarterback. He won't really turn over the football for you or, do anything crazy. So I'll leave you guys with that. Really appreciate you guys joining me on this Sunday, on this fabulous Sunday, talking about the New York Football Giants as the draft is nearing close. So make sure to hit the subscribe button. Make sure to follow us on Twitter. Make sure to follow us on TikTok. Where else? Obviously, subscribe. Instagram. All of that and more. And I'll see you guys in the next one.